what Grayson just said. It's about where on the animal that cut is coming from. Okay? We have sedentary muscles.
Oh.
What?
Sedentary and motion muscles. You're a sophomore in high school, you don't know how to spell sedentary? Figure it out. It's not an English class. Sedentary means that they don't move, right? Or they don't do much. Okay? A motion muscle is what? Just that. It's something that moves the animal, right? So if you think about an animal that's on all fours, like a cow or a steer, right? So the brisket's coming from right about here. So the chuck and the brisket and the flank, okay, flank steak, right, is going to be constantly expanding and contracting. So over the course of the life of that animal, that muscle is going to get used a lot more. A filet mignon or a New York strip or a ribeye, okay? Those muscles are not really doing anything but laying. They're protecting internal organs. They're acting as shock absorbers, right? This is from the round, or it's going to be the back leg of the animal. It's the top part of the back leg of the animal, right? Okay? So some of it's moved, some of it's not. So I chose this piece because we've got a lot of different kind of meat structure in here. Okay? So typically, chicken breast versus chicken thighs. Can we grill chicken thighs? Yeah, sure. Should we grill it? Okay? Think about chicken. You know, chickens don't fly, right? They have wings, and turkeys don't fly, they have wings. So, grilled turkey breast, grilled chicken breast, that's an appropriate cooking measure because those muscles aren't as developed, right? But turkey legs, turkey thighs, chicken legs, chicken thighs, you know, if we cook them prior in the oven, if we roast them, or if we blanch them almost, right? Then we can mark them on the grill. Okay? So if we baste them with sauce and then we want to get that charred, smoky kind of flavor, then we can add those after they've been cooked and then basted or marinated. We can add those or finish those off on the grill to mark them on the grill, right? But to cook them all the way from raw to all the way through, it's just going to make the meat tougher. Okay? So if you could imagine a cable, a piece of cable, right? That's made up of a whole bunch of other smaller cables. That's what a piece of meat is going to look like. If you look at it under a microscope. So, if it looks something like this, you're going to see a whole bunch of little smaller cables. Okay? When you look at the meat, okay, so if you looked at a certain piece of meat, you're going to see these lines running through it, right? Okay, that's known as the grain of the meat, okay? The grain is a very important thing when we're talking about meat, okay? Who's ever heard the term of cutting across the grain or cutting with the grain, right? So what does that mean? So if I cut with the grain, or I cut across the grain, okay? Now, meat is made up of a series of these little bundles, okay? And they're going to be wrapped in connective tissue, okay? When we cook it, it expands and contracts, okay? It'll contract when we heat it, okay? And it'll keep contracting the more and more we heat it, the more and more we cook it, right? Okay? So we also have another term that we use when we let the meat rest. What does that mean? Anybody know?
You let it cool off, per se, absorb all the juices.
Right. Okay, so when we're no longer cooking it, we don't want to cut it immediately because all of these fibers have expanded. And all the moisture, all the fat, all the blood, all the water, any kind of marinade that we've injected into it, they're all expanded. So if we cut it, everything's going to drip out, and we're going to be left with a really dry, tough to eat piece of meat, or chicken, or other kind of poultry. Does that make sense?
So,
Okay? So when we look at certain cuts, who's ever seen a filet mignon? Okay, so it looks really, really smooth on the surface, right? Okay, but if you look at a piece of brisket, you look at the meat, you can actually see defined lines in that meat, right? You take a look at a piece of pot roast, right? That's going to go into the oven, or a piece of flank steak. Flank steak is going to be an oblong kind of piece of meat like that. And if you look at the surface of it, you'll actually see the lines, okay, those striations of the muscle in there, okay? It's going to be really important that, you know, a lot of times when we cook flank steak, we'll marinate it and we'll mark it on the grill, but we won't finish cooking it there. We'll finish cooking it in the oven. So too thick to try to cook all the way through on the grill, but we still want to get that nice char, smoky kind of flavor, okay? So we marquer en cuisson. What does that mean? To what? To mark without cooking. Marquer en cuisson, to mark without cooking, okay? Tenderloin, the meat isn't as developed. So we're still going to have the same kind of structure, but the more defined those lines are, where that grain is, the more developed the muscle is, okay? If it looks really smooth and you can't really see those defined lines in the meat, then it's going to be a real tender piece of meat, okay? So sedentary muscles don't move. They don't really do much more than protect the spinal column, the internal organs. So that's why a ribeye is going to be tender. That's why a filet mignon or a New York strip is going to be tender. But that's why flank steak and chuck and brisket are going to be a lot tougher because those muscles are developed, okay? Everybody still with me?
yes, sir.
Okay. So grilling is a high heat, direct contact cooking method. Okay. So if we use that high heat, direct contact cooking, okay, it's going to really cook it too fast. So a tough piece of meat isn't going to be the best choice to cook in that method. Tougher pieces of meat, like a brisket, slow, low temperature, slow, okay? It's got a lot of fat on it, okay? Most meats are going to have two types of fat, okay? We have collagen, collagen fat, and then we have elastin. elastin, what does it sound like? What does that word?
Elastic.
Elastic. So what does that imply? If I say elastin, it's for stretching, it's what? What else? Tough. Right? Who's ever eaten a piece of meat and gotten bristle? Okay, where you just chew and chew and chew and chew, and no matter what, you can't. It won't do anything. It just stays. It's like a piece of bubble gum, right? Okay, that's probably elastin. Okay, collagen is the stuff that. Let's go back to the brisket. Okay, it's the stuff that renders down. It's the stuff that cooks down, makes the steak or the brisket juicy. Okay, it's got flavor. Okay, who's ever had roast beef? Okay, you cook that roast beef and maybe there's some fat on it like that. You cut that piece down,